My name is Miranda. I am 38 years old, and on a Tuesday night in February, I lay completely still in the king-sized bed my husband and I had shared for 11 years, listening to the careful, deliberate sound of him packing his suitcase in the dark. He didn't turn on the light. That was the choice that told me everything I already knew. That he was not leaving in anger. Not leaving in the heat of something said wrong at dinner. He was leaving the way people leave when they have been planning it for a long time. Slowly, methodically. The way you move when you've already rehearsed. I could hear the soft pull of drawer handles, the controlled drag of fabric over wood, the precise zip of a toiletry bag closed with the care of someone who doesn't want to be heard. I heard the sound of his watch being placed into his travel case, the small, specific click of the metal lid, and I knew without opening my eyes which watch it was. The one his father had given him for his 40th. The one he said he'd never travel without. I lay there with my hands folded at my sides and my breathing slow and even, and I counted. I counted the number of trips between the closet and the bed. 7. I counted the seconds he stood at the bedroom doorway before he left for the last time. 4 seconds. I counted the sound of his footsteps on the stairs. 14. Then the front door. Then his car reversing out of the driveway. Then the long, absolute silence of a Tuesday night in February in a nice neighborhood in Charlotte, North Carolina. What he didn't know was that 3 days before that Tuesday night, I had already transferred $247,000 from our joint savings account into an account he had never heard of, at a bank he had no relationship with, in a name that was mine alone. What he didn't know was that I had already filed for divorce 5 weeks earlier, that the papers were already sitting with the Mecklenburg County Clerk's office, waiting for a process server to find him. Which, as it turned out, would happen in a parking garage, on a morning he had a quarterly earnings presentation to deliver. In front of colleagues he had spent a decade carefully impressing. What he didn't know was that I had documentation of every transfer he had made over 18 months to an account linked to a woman named Paige, every single one. And what he didn't know was that the woman lying still in that bed, breathing slowly in the dark, was not the woman he had left behind 4 years ago when he decided she was finished growing. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just lay there. This is that story. Derek Whitfield and I met in the autumn of 2009 at a regional sales conference in Raleigh. I was 24 years old, 18 months into my first real job as a junior account manager at a mid-sized pharmaceutical company. He was 30, already a senior sales director, and he had the specific competence of a man who has figured out very early how to read a room and position himself at its center. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and loud in the way that rooms full of people decided to admire rather than resent. I found that magnetic at the time. I was young enough to confuse performance with presence. We dated for 2 years before he proposed, at a restaurant called The Oak in downtown Raleigh on an October evening in 2011. I cried. He had planned it meticulously. The table, the ring, the timing. It was the kind of proposal that told me he paid attention, that he cared about the details. What I didn't understand yet was that paying meticulous attention to details is not the same as caring about the person those details are meant for. Sometimes it is just a skill. We got married in April of 2011 in a white tent in my parents' backyard in Concord, North Carolina. 83 guests. Pale yellow wildflowers. My mother had driven 2 hours each way to collect from a farm market outside of Asheboro. I wore a dress I had bought on sale and had altered 3 separate times because I refused to spend $4,000 on fabric I would wear for 7 hours. Derek made fun of that in his wedding toast. He called me the most practical woman he'd ever loved. Every person in that tent laughed. I smiled. I should have paid closer attention to what that word was doing in his mouth. Practical. The way it sat between affection and diminishment, just close enough to each that you couldn't accuse it of being either. In the first years of our marriage, I worked hard and I was good at what I did. I received 2 promotions in 3 years at the pharmaceutical company, and by 2014 I was earning $91,000 a year with a performance bonus. Derek, by that point, had accepted a vice president of sales position at a medical device company called ClearPath Dynamics, based in Fort Mill, South Carolina. His total compensation in 2014 was $194,000. We bought a 4-bedroom house in the Ballantine neighborhood of Charlotte. The kind of neighborhood where every lawn is edged on Saturday mornings and the neighborhood association sends gentle reminders about holiday decoration guidelines. We had 2 cars, a joint savings account, a joint investment portfolio managed through a brokerage platform Derek had selected, and a 5-year plan that included more travel, a family, and the kind of slow, comfortable accumulation that looks from the outside exactly like a life. What I didn't know was that Derek was running a separate plan alongside ours. The first moment I can point to clearly, though I minimized it deeply at the time, came in the spring of 2016. I had been approached about a director-level position at a health technology startup out of Raleigh. The salary was not an increase, but the equity package was meaningful, 1.2% of a pre-Series B company working in a category that was already beginning to attract serious capital. I was genuinely excited. I came home on a Wednesday evening and told Derek over dinner, and he listened the way he always listened when he had already made a decision. Completely still, completely patient. Waiting with the calm of a man who has no intention of going where the conversation wants to take him. Raleigh is 2.5 hours, Miranda. I know. I thought we could talk about what that might look like. I just got elevated to VP. My entire client network is here. My team is here. You want me to look at relocating because a startup offered you a title change? It's more than a title. Equity in a pre-series company is theoretical money. You know that. The upside is a maybe. What we have here is real. I turned it down. I told myself I was being rational. That he was right. That we were building something together. And that 2.5 hours was genuinely far. I told myself all of this, and I believed most of it. The way you believe the explanation that fits most neatly into the life you're already living. There was one more detail about that conversation I have never stopped thinking about. After I had agreed, after I had said, "Fine, we'll stay," Derek reached across the table and squeezed my hand. He said, "I just want to protect what we have." And I remember feeling grateful. Grateful that he cared enough to protect us. It was only much later that I understood that what he was protecting was not us at all. What he was protecting was the arrangement, the one where I stayed close and small and manageable, and he kept expanding into whatever room he decided to enter next. Looking back now, I can identify at least 9 moments of that same shape between 2011 and 2022. 9 moments where something opened for me and Derek positioned himself in front of it, with the quiet, reasonable language of a man who was always thinking about what was best for us. And every single time, what was best for us was whatever kept me close and kept my ambitions small enough not to create inconvenience in the life he was building for himself. In March of 2018, I left my corporate job. Derek had been suggesting it for 2 years by that point, framing it as freedom, as a gift I was giving myself, as the next logical chapter. "You work so hard," he'd say. "We don't need 2 incomes. Take some time. Rest. Figure out what you really want." I was 33 years old. I was tired in the particular, grinding way that corporate work makes women tired. The kind of tired that lives in your shoulders and behind your eyes, and quietly hollows out your sense of your own worth. The idea of rest felt like an offering. I believed him. I gave my notice in March of 2018, and spent the next 14 months doing what Derek called decompress. What I was actually doing was becoming financially dependent on him. And I believe now that that was, if not precisely planned, then certainly welcomed. By 2019, Derek managed every joint financial account, the investment platform, the brokerage, the retirement portfolio, the savings account. Every transfer of any size moved through his hands. My personal checking account held roughly $3,000 at any given time. Enough for groceries, gas, dry cleaning, the occasional lunch with a friend. Derek called this arrangement efficient. He said I didn't need to worry about the complexity. He said managing the household finances was one thing he could do to take care of us. And I accepted it, not because I was naive, but because I was tired and because accepting it felt like trust. But trust and dependency are not the same thing. And I was living in one while believing it was the other. The second clear sign came in February of 2020. Derek and I had been discussing starting a family for 2 years, and every time I raised it, he introduced a new reason to wait. More savings needed, market uncertainty. the house not paid down enough. Not yet, not quite yet. And then, on a Sunday morning in February, I found out I was pregnant. I was 8 weeks along. I told Derek over coffee in our kitchen at 9:15 in the morning, and he set his mug down very slowly and looked at me with an expression I had never seen before on his face. Not anger. Not fear. Something quieter and more deliberate than either, something that was making calculations. "We've talked about timing," he said. "I know, but it happened. This is not a good time for me professionally, Miranda. Not for us, for him." He said me. I lost the pregnancy at 11 weeks. Derek was in Denver on a business trip when it happened. He flew home 2 days later. He said all the right things. He held me exactly the way you hold someone who is grieving. But underneath it, in the quality of his relief, which he could not entirely conceal from a woman who had been watching him closely for 9 years, I felt something that I did not name out loud, but which I felt I now understand was the first time I truly saw him, not the performance, him. I said nothing. I filed it in a place inside myself where I kept everything that didn't fit the story I was still working to make function. And I kept going. The third thing I can name clearly is the isolation. Over 11 years, Derek had made my professional network and my close friendships quietly, consistently inconvenient. Former colleagues gradually fell away. Schedule conflicts, his subtle mentions that someone had said something he found slightly off, his comments about how tired I seemed and shouldn't I rest instead. He was never rude to my friends. He was charming to them, actually. But charm deployed in the service of separation is still separation. By 2021, the person I spoke to most regularly was Cassie Beaumont, who lived 2 streets over in Ballantyne and who Derek liked because Cassie was similarly situated, married to a high-earning man, financially dependent, her world organized around the domestic rhythms of a quiet neighborhood. Safe, contained. Not the kind of friend who would ask me the questions I most needed someone to ask. By 2022, I was 37 years old and I had been out of the workforce for 4 years. I had no independent income. I had a personal bank account with $3,000 in it. I had a beautiful house I did not own, a car registered in both our names, and a husband who looked at me across the dinner table most evenings with the patient, distant expression of a man performing the maintenance of an investment that had stopped returning what he'd originally projected. I want you to understand something about those years. They didn't feel like what I just described. They felt normal. They felt like marriage. They felt like the compromise and accommodation that everyone says is part of building a life with another person. The smallness of it was so gradual, so wrapped in reasonable language, that I did not experience it as diminishment. I experienced it as adulthood, and that the unmarked, uncelebrated way a capable person can be systematically reduced is the most dangerous part of the whole story. I found out about Paige Hensley on a Thursday in late October of 2022. Not because Derek left his phone unlocked. Not because someone told me. Not because of a receipt, a hotel key, a lipstick stain from a film that was made in a different decade. I found out because Derek made a mistake with a folder on our shared laptop, and because I had spent 4 years becoming someone who he believed no longer paid close attention. He was wrong about that. Our household finances were managed on a shared family laptop, a setup Derek had established years ago under the framing of transparency. He had his own company-issued device, locked and separate, for professional work. The shared laptop was for household accounts. He could see everything through his logins, and so technically could I. Though the platforms he used were ones I'd never learned to navigate and the passwords I didn't have. The balances were visible. The movements were not. That was, I now understand, very deliberately constructed. On a Thursday afternoon in late October, I was using the laptop to look up a recipe, a simple dinner, something to fill the 45 minutes between his arrival home and whatever polite, hollow conversation we'd have over food. I accidentally opened a folder Derek had mislabeled. He had been creating a folder called Home Records and had titled it something close enough to an existing folder that it nested in the same drop-down directory I'd opened. Inside were 6 months of bank statements from an account I had never seen. The account was held at a credit union in Gastonia, North Carolina. The account holder name was listed as Derek Allen Whitfield, his full legal name. The closing balance on the most recent statement was $312,000, and in the memo line of every inbound transfer, $9,000 every month, beginning in April, was one word. One letter, actually. P. I sat at the kitchen table for 47 minutes without moving. I went through every page. I read every line of every statement 3 times. I did the arithmetic in my head and then again on a notepad. Over 18 months, Derek had moved $162,000 from somewhere into this account, monthly, without variation. With the quiet, practiced regularity of a man who had made this transfer so many times it had become administrative. Then I did something Derek would never have expected from the woman he'd spent 4 years carefully shrinking. I photographed every single page. I did it methodically, page by page, angling the phone so the account number and his full name were visible in every frame. Then I closed the folder. I cleared the browser history. I put the laptop back exactly where it had been. And I went back to the recipe I had originally opened and made dinner. Derek came home at 7:22. He sat across the table from me and ate the chicken I had cooked. He talked about an upcoming client dinner in Atlanta. He asked me how my day was. He looked at me the way he always looked at me, with the pleasant, slightly remote attention of a man checking in on something he considers managed. Good, I said. Quiet. How was yours? He said fine. He poured himself more wine. He talked about a colleague. I listened. I smiled. I refilled his glass. And that night, after he fell asleep, I lay in the dark for 3 hours and made a decision. A single, clear, irreversible decision. I was not going to confront him. I was not going to send an accusatory message. I was not going to call his mother or tell a friend or spend one moment in public grief over what I had found. I was going to be completely, perfectly, invisibly quiet. And in that quiet, I was going to undo every single thing he had built, piece by piece, before he noticed the first piece was gone. That was the moment I stopped being Derek's wife and started becoming something I had no name for yet. Something that doesn't announce itself. Something that only becomes visible when it is already finished. The first call I made was to Diane Marsh the following morning, a Friday. Diane was a former colleague from my pharmaceutical years who'd moved to Portland, Oregon in 2019. Derek had never managed to fully isolate me from Deanne. She was too far away to feel like a threat to him. And we had an easy rhythm of calling every couple of months. That Friday morning I told her exactly what I had found. Diane did not express surprise. She expressed the particular quiet of someone who has been waiting years for a shoe to drop. Within 24 hours she had given me a name, Patricia Caldwell, a partner at a family law firm on East Trade Street in Uptown Charlotte, known specifically for high-asset divorce cases involving financial fraud. I called Patricia Caldwell's office at 9 in the morning the following Monday and made an appointment. I met her for the first time on November 7, 2022. Her office was on the 14th floor of a building that looked over the city from a height that felt appropriate for the conversation I was about to have. I wore a navy blazer I hadn't worn in 2 years. I'd had to find it at the back of the closet, behind coats and past things I'd stopped needing. I wanted to feel like someone with a professional self. I brought the photographs from the laptop. I also brought 3 years of household budget summaries I had kept in a spiral-bound notebook, a habit Derek had always teased as unnecessary housekeeping. He called it my diary. I called it what it was, a record. Patricia reviewed the photographs without speaking for 11 minutes. Then she put them down and looked at me. "How long have you been out of the workforce?" she asked. 4 years. "Do you have any independent income? Any source, however small?" "No." "Professional contacts still active?" "A few." She nodded. She told me that what I had documented was consistent with marital asset dissipation, the transferring of marital funds outside the marriage, potentially to a third party. In North Carolina, that was directly relevant to equitable distribution. But she told me something else. And she said it plainly, without softening. The moment Derek knew I was aware of any of this, the money would move faster than we could freeze it. The filing had to come second. Financial stability had to come first. We were going to do this in a very specific order. That specific order became the structure of the next 14 weeks of my life. In the first 2 weeks, I did 3 things. I opened a personal checking account at a bank Derek had no connection to, a regional branch with no crossover with any account we shared. I deposited $2,040 into it, the sum I had been quietly saving for 3 years by rounding down my grocery budgets and putting the difference, a few dollars each week, into an envelope inside an old coat pocket in the back of the closet. It was not very much. It was everything. Then I called Janet Robles, my former supervisor at the pharmaceutical company, now the operations director of a healthcare consulting firm in Raleigh. I had maintained that contact carefully, quietly, the way you maintain something you are not sure you'll need but are not willing to lose. I told Janet I was thinking about returning to professional work. She called me back the following day. 3 weeks after sitting at my kitchen table for 47 silent minutes, I had a consulting contract. Project-based. A 3-month engagement reviewing compliance documentation for a regional hospital network in the Piedmont area. The rate was $95 per hour. The work was entirely remote. I did it between 9 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon, every weekday, sitting at the same kitchen table where I had made dinner while keeping the largest secret of my life. I did not mention the contract to Derek. He did not ask how I spent my days. He had not asked in years. That, too, was something I had filed away and was now putting to use. The work itself was slower than I had expected at first. I had been out of compliance documentation for 4 years, and the regulatory frameworks had shifted in ways I needed to catch up on. I spent the first week reading, quietly, between 9 and 2. The laptop open at the kitchen table in the same house where Derek had decided I was finished being professional. I subscribed to 2 industry journals under my new business email account. I ordered 3 textbooks using my new bank account's debit card. I found that I remembered more than I thought I had. Competence, it turns out, does not expire the way confidence does. Competence is the thing they take. The competence stays, waiting. By December 15, 2022, I had invoiced for 42 hours of work and deposited $3,990 of my own money. I remember standing at the kitchen counter on a Tuesday morning holding my phone, reading the deposit notification the way you read something you have been waiting a long time to see. It wasn't pride, it was something more foundational than that. It was the feeling of standing on ground that belonged to me after years of standing on ground that was graciously loaned. December passed quietly in our house. We spent Christmas in Greensboro with Derek's family, his parents Jean and Loretta, his younger brother Paul and Paul's wife Carol, and their 2 young children, who ran through their grandparents' house in new pajamas and treated the holidays with the absolute confidence of people who believe nothing is wrong. I played my role. I made the 2 appetizers I always made. I laughed at the right moments. I watched Derek across the room, holding court with Paul's colleagues at the fireplace, leaning into a story, touching Loretta's shoulder when she laughed. And I thought about the folder, and the transfers, and the woman receiving $9,000 a month, and felt something that surprised me in its stillness. I felt clear, not happy, not righteous, just clear in the way that people feel clear when they have stopped pretending. In January of 2023, Patricia told me we were approaching the window to move on the joint accounts. She explained it carefully. In North Carolina, a spouse retains legal access to jointly held marital accounts until a formal separation agreement or court order changes that access. A withdrawal made before filing was legal, documented, and would be accounted for in the equitable distribution process. It was not theft, it was asset preservation, especially given the documented evidence of Derek's own transfers. She told me the amount to withdraw, approximately half the total liquid savings, leaving the other half to avoid triggering automatic bank alerts that might reach Derek before the papers were served. On January 21, 2023, at 2:47 in the afternoon, I sat in my car in the parking lot of a Harris Teeter grocery store on Pineville Matthews Road and transferred $247,000 from our joint savings account into my account at the separate bank. I had a grocery list on the seat beside me, $16.40 worth of things for dinner. I pressed confirm. I watched the number leave the screen. I didn't feel powerful. I didn't feel victorious. I felt the steady, undramatic calm of a person completing a task they have been preparing for a very long time. Exactly right. Exactly necessary. I put the phone in my bag. I went inside and bought the groceries. 2 days later, on January 23rd, Patricia filed the divorce petition. I was named as petitioner, Derek as respondent. The petition detailed allegations of marital waste and financial fraud, listed the Gastonia Credit Union account as a marital asset subject to equitable distribution, and requested the court freeze it along with the receiving account pending full forensic discovery. We had documentation. Patricia had spent 2 months building a paper architecture around it that was, as she told me, not airtight. She said airtight. On January 25th, a process server found Derek in the parking garage of the ClearPath Dynamics building on Ballantyne Corporate Place at 9:20 in the morning. He had a quarterly earnings presentation beginning at 9:30. I know the details of that morning because a woman named Stephanie, a colleague of Derek's who had never liked him and had a gift for observation, mentioned to a mutual contact later that day that Derek had received some kind of document in the parking garage and gone completely white, that he had stood there for a long time without moving, that he had come upstairs and missed the entire presentation without explanation. I heard this and I thought, yes, that sounds right. That evening, Derek came home at 6:54. He stood in the kitchen doorway holding the papers. He looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face in 11 years. Not the anger, not the bluster, not the careful patience. Something cracked open. Something that looked, for the first time, like a man who had run out of available positions to retreat to. "What is this?" he said. I was at the stove. I reached over and turned down the heat on what I was cooking. I turned around to face him. I was completely calm. "I think you know what it is, Derek. Miranda, my attorney, has asked that all communication go through her from this point. You have her number. She's expecting your attorney's call." He opened his mouth. He closed it. "There's dinner if you want it," I said, and I turned back to the stove. He stood in that doorway for a very long time. Then he went upstairs. He did not come back down for dinner. He did not come out of the guest room until the following morning. And over the 16 days that followed, while he slept in the guest room and I slept in our room with the windows cracked even though it was January, he began, piece by piece, to move his belongings out of our shared life. A suit here, a pair of shoes there, his watch case, his books from the nightstand, building toward a departure that he believed was his own idea, not understanding that I had already arranged every part of it, not understanding that the woman in the bed was not waiting for him to leave. She had already left, months before, in every way that actually mattered. If you are still watching this story, I want to stop for just a moment and ask you something. Drop a comment below and tell me one word, just one, that describes the version of yourself you have been too quiet about for too long. The version that exists underneath the role someone else decided you should play. Because I believe there are women watching this right now who know exactly which folder they haven't opened yet, who are sitting in rooms that look right from the outside and feel wrong from the inside, and who are one decision away from changing everything. If this story is reaching something real for you, please subscribe to this channel. We release a new story every single week, and the next one might be the one that gives you the permission you didn't know you were waiting for. The moment everything became public happened on a Saturday night in early March of 2023. It happened at Derek's 40th birthday party, which his mother Loretta had been organizing for 6 months at the Ballantyne Hotel. A private dining room on the ground floor, 40 guests, 4-course dinner, a custom video she had commissioned playing on a screen at the front of the room. Derek had no idea about the video. He thought it was just a family dinner. Loretta had always had a talent for spectacle, and for meaning every word of it. I almost didn't go. Patricia had advised against it. "You don't need to be in that room," she said. "The proceedings are already in motion. You've done everything correctly. You don't need to perform anything for anyone." I understood her reasoning, but Loretta had called me 3 weeks before the party, and her voice had been careful in the way that a woman's voice is careful when she loves someone and suspects something she cannot bring herself to name. "Whatever is happening," she said, "I need you there, Miranda. I need there to be something in that room that still makes sense." And I had said yes. Not for Derek, for Loretta, who had always treated me like I was genuinely hers. And because I had learned in the preceding months that composed presence in a difficult room is sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can offer it, I arrived at 7:15 on Saturday, March 4th. I had bought a new dress the week before. Charcoal, clean, nothing elaborate. It was the first piece of clothing I had purchased entirely with money I had earned myself since 2018, and I noticed it the way you notice the first full breath after a long time of breathing shallowly. I sat at the main table, 3 seats from Derek, who was already in conversation with his brother Paul when I arrived. He looked at me when I walked in. He said nothing. I looked back at him, evenly, and said nothing. Then I sat down and greeted the guests around me. Derek's close friend Brett Calloway was directly across the table from me. Brett was the kind of man who had always treated me as an extension of Derek's identity, rather than as a person in my own right. Perfectly pleasant in the way people are pleasant to furniture. He was already on his second drink when dinner began, and midway through the first course he leaned toward me with the studied sympathy of a man who believes he has access to more information than he does. "Big night," Brett said. "You doing okay? Given everything?" "I'm wonderful," I said. "Thank you for asking, Brett." He blinked. That was not the answer he had calibrated for. Dinner continued. The video played, a compilation of photographs Loretta had gathered across 4 decades, narrated by her own voice over music she had chosen herself. Derek's childhood, his high school years, his college graduation, his early career, and then a section of our marriage, our wedding day under the white tent, the house in Ballantyne, a trip we had taken to Asheville in the autumn of 2015, another to Savannah in 2017. I watched those photographs with the composure of someone who has already finished grieving what they show. Then, midway through the third course, Derek's phone lit up on the table beside his plate. He always left it face up at dinners. Old habit. He glanced at it. He went completely still. I did not look at the phone. I didn't need to. But Brett, seated across from me, could see the screen from his angle. His expression changed, a rapid, involuntary recalibration, the look of a man who has just read something he shouldn't have and doesn't know where to put it. Paul, sitting beside Derek, leaned over the way family members lean at dinner tables when something lands wrong. He looked at the screen. Then he looked up at Derek. And then he looked, slowly, across the table at me. I would learn later what the message said. Paige had been served by Patricia's process server that same afternoon with documentation identifying her as a financial witness in the divorce proceedings and notifying her that the account receiving the monthly transfers was under forensic audit. Paige, apparently not a person who absorbed bad news quietly, had messaged Derek. "You told me you were separated. You told me this was already resolved. What is happening right now? Who is Miranda Whitfield?" That message, arriving on Derek's upward-facing phone in a private dining room with 40 witnesses that included his parents, his brother, his colleagues, and his wife seated 3 chairs away, was the most public thing I had never planned. Derek stood. His chair made a sound against the floor that broke the conversation at every table in the room. Every face turned toward him. "Excuse me," he said. His voice was perfectly level and completely hollow. He walked to the exit at the far end of the room, pushed through the door, and was gone. The room held its breath. Loretta, at the far end of the table, set down her fork with a slowness that I recognized as the movement of a woman absorbing something she has suspected for a long time, and is only now allowing herself to name. She said, in a voice just above a whisper to no one and everyone, "I need a moment." No one moved. No one spoke. The video was still playing on the screen at the front of the room. It had reached the section of photographs from 2017, a trip to Savannah, Derek and me on a wrought iron balcony, both of us squinting into afternoon sun. The music played over those photographs for a few more seconds. Then someone quietly reached over and stopped it. I sat where I was. I did not explain. I did not perform distress or composure or anything at all. I took a sip of water. I put my glass down. I looked at the table. Brett was staring at me. Paul was staring at me. Carol, beside him, was staring at me. Several of Derek's colleagues, men and women I had sat next to at company dinners for a decade, were looking at me with expressions that moved through confusion and recognition and then landed on something that looked very much like respect. I offered none of them a word of explanation. They were not owed one. Patricia's assistant called me on my drive home at 10:41 that evening to confirm that all 3 accounts, the joint savings account with its remaining balance, the Gastonia Credit Union account, and the account receiving the monthly transfers, had been frozen by court order effective that afternoon. The combined amount under court protection was $893,000. I said thank you. I hung up. I drove home through Charlotte on a clear March night with the windows down and the city lights making halos in the cold air, and I thought about the fact that the most important thing I had done in 14 weeks was not the transfer, not the filing, not even the documentation. It was the decision on a Thursday night in October to be quiet, to act instead of react, to let my stillness be the most powerful thing in the room. Derek did not return to the house that night. He checked into a hotel in South Charlotte, I was told later, and over the following 16 days he sent me 4 text messages. I want to tell you about those messages in some detail because I think they represent something important about the specific way that men who have quietly managed women for years attempt to recover. The situation when the management fails. The pattern is almost always the same, and knowing it in advance is one of the most useful things I can offer you. The first arrived at 6:47 the morning after the party. It read, "Miranda, I think we need to talk before this goes further. I know you're angry. Let's find a way to handle this privately." I forwarded it to Patricia. The second came 3 days later in the afternoon. "I understand you're hurt. I made mistakes. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But the amounts in those accounts, most of that was from my income, separate income. I'd like the chance to explain the context before attorneys make all of this worse." I forwarded it to Patricia. The third message was sent at 11:32 at night, 11 days after the party. It was the longest. It moved through our shared history, specific moments, places we had been, things I had said that he had kept. It ended with the words, "I know I made you feel like you weren't my priority. I know I should have been better. But you were always the most important thing to me. I need you to know that." I read that message twice, not because it moved me, because I wanted to understand what kind of appeal it was. It was the kind that has always worked on women who were taught to believe that being needed is the same as being loved, that a man who says the right words when he is desperate has been saying them genuinely all along. I had spent 11 years responding to that kind of language. I recognized every mechanism of it. I forwarded it to Patricia. The fourth message arrived 16 days after the party, at 2:12 in the afternoon. It said only, "I never stopped loving you." I did not forward that one. I deleted it, quietly, without anger. The way you delete something that no longer has any claim on your attention. The divorce was finalized on September 18, 2023, under the settlement, which was negotiated without a court proceeding, after Derek's attorney determined that a public trial would expose the complete documentation of his asset transfers in a forum with no favorable outcomes. I received the family home, 60% of the total marital investment portfolio, and a lump sum payment of $140,000 representing my recovered share of the Gastonia account funds, offset against the pre-separation withdrawals. Derek retained his career, his personal retirement accounts, and the significantly depleted Gastonia account after legal fees and costs and the settlement amounts were subtracted. Paige Hensley had ended things with Derek before the finalization. I was told this incidentally by someone who knew someone. I did not feel what I expected to feel about it, which was nothing much at all. I sold the Ballantyne house in November of 2023. I bought a smaller house in Dilworth, 1,800 square feet, a kitchen with excellent morning light, a porch that faces east, a guest room where Cassie Beaumont has stayed twice since I moved in, both times because she was working through her own reckoning with the life she had quietly arranged herself into. The neighborhood is walkable. It has a bookstore and a coffee shop and a farmer's market on Sunday mornings. Derek would have called it too artsy. I call it mine. My consulting practice is now a registered LLC. I specialize in compliance documentation for mid-size healthcare organizations. In 2023, my first full year working independently, I billed 411 hours at rates between $95 and $140 per engagement. In 2024, I brought on my first associate. I have a business card that says my name and my company's name and nothing else. And every time I hand it to someone, I feel the specific satisfaction of a person who has rebuilt what was taken from them, piece by piece, in the quiet before dawn. I am 38 years old. I own my income, my time, my accounts, and the walls I sleep within. Here is what I want to say to you. Not to everyone. To you, the specific person watching this who recognized something in this story. I am not telling you this so that you will be angry. I am not telling you so that you will feel validated in whatever you're sitting with, though if you feel that, it belongs to you. I am telling you this because of the 4 years I spent watching doors close and explaining to myself why that was fine, why that was necessary, why the woman I was becoming, smaller, quieter, more dependent, more willing to accept the circumference she had been given, was just the natural accommodation of a shared life. The most dangerous lie a capable woman can be made to believe is that her capability is a burden on the people around her, that her ambition, her income, her professional presence, her independent connections, that these things threaten something more fragile and more important than themselves. Derek never told me I was less. He never raised his voice. He never used a single word you could point to in a court of law and call controlling. He simply arranged the furniture of our lives so that every place I could stand was smaller than where he stood. And I accepted that arrangement for years because I confused the absence of cruelty with the presence of love. What I know now is this: the quietest diminishments are the ones you make excuses for longest. Not because you are weak, because you are hopeful, because you are a person who believes the best about the people you have chosen to love. And hope, when handed to someone who has decided not to deserve it, becomes the very mechanism that keeps you still while they move. There is also something I want to say about the women who watched it happen and said nothing, not because they were cruel, but because the story looked right from the outside. From the outside, Derek and I looked like a successful marriage. We looked like a partnership. We looked like two adults who had made reasonable decisions together about how to structure their lives. I want you to understand that this is not a coincidence. The kind of control Derek exercised is specifically designed to look, from every external angle, like care, like consideration, like a husband who manages the complexity so his wife doesn't have to. And because it looks like that, the people around you don't intervene. They see a capable woman who chose a comfortable life. They don't see the specific architecture of how she got there, the 9 conversations she didn't win, the 4 years she stopped asking, the gradual removal of every external foothold until the only solid ground she had was the ground he was willing to lend her. I am telling you this not to assign blame to the people who didn't see it, but because I want you, the person watching this, to know that if you are living inside that architecture right now, you are not imagining it. You are not being dramatic. The fact that it doesn't look like damage from the outside is not evidence that it isn't. It is evidence that it was built well. The moment everything changed was not the moment I found the folder. It was the moment I closed it, cleared the history, and made dinner. That was the moment I stopped trying to make the story work and started paying attention to what the story actually was. That was the moment I stopped explaining myself to him and started documenting. And once I started documenting, everything else followed. Not in a rush, not in fire. In the slow, invisible, exact way that real change almost always happens. One deliberate, private decision at a time. I built it in silence. Everything I have now, the income, the LLC, the house with the eastern light, the right to fall asleep in a room that is only mine. I built it in the dark while he slept in the next room, while he thought I was still the person he had decided I was. And by the time he picked up that suitcase, I was already somewhere else entirely. He just didn't know it yet. And here is my question for you, the one I'd like you to leave in the comments before you go. Have you ever built something in silence that the person who underestimated you still doesn't know about? Or are you sitting in that room right now, watching, recognizing something you haven't yet let yourself name? Because if you are, I want you to know that the folder is already there. You don't have to open it tonight, but when you're ready, you will know exactly what to do. To every single person who watched this story all the way to the end, thank you. Not in a small or polite way, in the way that genuinely matters, because you chose to stay. This channel exists because quiet women deserve loud witnesses, because there are women out there right now in houses that look perfect and lives that feel wrong, and they need to hear that stillness is not the same as surrender, that building in silence is not weakness, that the moment you decide to stop explaining yourself and start documenting is the moment everything changes. If this story reached you, please subscribe. We release a new story every week, and every one of them was built for someone who needed it. Share this with one person who might need it too. And leave us a comment. We read every word. You are not invisible here. You never were. Thank you for being part of this.